Hi, everyone, and welcome to this session. My name is Anish George. I'm here to talk or give you a brief introduction into product management in gaming space. So we have quite a bit to cover today, so let's get into it. Quick note about me. I work as a product director at Pogo, which is a studio within Electronic Arts. We build a web service that offers a collection of games under a subscription business model. Feel free to check it out at pogo.com. In my role, I lead a cross-functional team, and that's a mix of PMs, designers, producers, and analysts. I am responsible for the product strategy, the player experience, and the growth of the business. In terms of game product management, my experience spans leading live services for mobile games and franchises such as Bejeweled, Plants vs. Zombies, and Tetris. Overall, I have product management experience also in the physical goods, consumer goods industry, which is what I was doing before, all parts of that value chain before I switched into game product management. That's also one of the reasons I decided to do this presentation, because of the perspective that it allowed me to gain. So let's jump into what we're going to talk about today. I want to cover a quick look into what the gaming market looks like, how big it is, how it's evolved over the last decade, and then talk about why product management grew as a discipline within gaming, because it wasn't in the past. And then what makes it different from or unique from the rest of the other industries. I then want to go into some of the skills that I think are essential for you to be a good game product manager, and then look at a couple of examples that give you a flavor of the problems that you tend to solve on a day-to-day basis, and then what work looks like for a junior to mid-level product manager on a daily basis. I hope that should be good enough content to provide an introduction. So straight into the gaming market, huge $200 billion expected out of this industry in 2023, double-digit growth across the board, in fact, for the last decade. To put it in perspective, it's larger than both the global movies industries and North American sports industry combined. The charts on the right give you a perspective on the splits by geography. The key point that I want to call out is the second chart, which tells you that mobile is almost 50% of the market as of 2020, and it is only expected to grow from here on out. And so let's dive a little bit deeper into that evolution. There is a lot to take in this chart. I have quoted the source here, so feel free to check this article out. But the piece that I wanted to call out is specifically mobile, which is the red section here. As you can see, it started picking up in the early 2000s and then kind of exploded post 2007, 2009, and then went on to gain almost half of the market in the gaming industry. And that's a key piece, because that really opened up gaming to a huge amount of users. So for reference, right now, the count for 2020 is that 2.7 billion players exist in the world. That's almost 1/3 the population of the world. So I wanted to put that in perspective before we go a little bit deeper into mobile. So what happened there? Now, some of you may be already familiar with this, so I'm going to kind of reduce it down to the key points, right? We used to buy, when you could remember the time when we had to go to a store, buy a game, you bring it home, install it, play it, and then once you're done with the game, that's the end of it. It goes into your collection and you forget about it and you wait for the next one. From a developer standpoint, you worked for years developing a game, put it out there, you made inventory to sell, and once the inventory was done, you make a decision of continuing or not, but you're already working on your next project. In mid-2000s, games started coming out such as Candy Crush, Farmville, which allowed for you to play those games without having to pay up front. It was free to play. But as you continued playing those games, you found that there were various reasons for which you could actually spend money in it. For example, you found the level too hard, and therefore you wanted to buy a power-up to make that easy for you. And so you spent some dollars in buying the collection of power-ups. You wanted a new costume for your character, and therefore you purchased some items that, cosmetic items that paid for it. Or you wanted to unlock another piece of the content, so you paid for that to open up. So that model changed the way things worked. What it did was it reduced the barrier for entry for players into engaging with these games, because you didn't have to pay anything upfront. For the developers, what it meant was suddenly you had this huge user base that was coming into your game, and now you could monetize them via ads, you could monetize them via free-to-play mechanics, other systems in game, And so all the investment costs that you put in developing that game, now the developer had to spend time recouping it, which is great because you could recoup way more than what you invested. And so that opened up the doors for a ton of developers to come into the space. But what that made was you were no longer designing a product and launching it, and that was the end all of it. In fact, you were designing and launching a product that was expected to continue to generate revenue streams for the next 5 to 10 years. And that really changed the paradigm there. And that's also why product management goes to more of significance within gaming. Because earlier, while it was a creative goal to design a game and put it out there and sell it, now it became, how do you support that game once the user starts playing it? How do you continue to add content? How do you continue to optimize features and create new features that will keep the players engaged and potentially monetize? And so looking out into the future, how do we make the trade-offs that results in the business outcomes that you want? So they needed a skill set that would come in and plan for that and look at how to operate it as an ongoing business instead of a product that is sold out of the store and it's done. So that's really where product management as a skill started growing, driven by mobile. Now it's more prevalent in the traditional gaming spaces as well, like PC and console games. You find games like Borderlands 3 or Call of Duty, where once the game is launched, there's so much more content that comes out after and that players engage with that creates spend. And so these mechanics are playing into other parts of the gaming industry as well. But overall, the freemium model essentially enabled the rise of live services, which is the post-launch support, and product management as a discipline within that. This is good context to have because it does tie into the kind of work that you do and why it is different. So as far as my take is, product management within gaming lies at the intersection of business and game design. Like I mentioned before, you are, from a business standpoint, managing and driving the performance of a game as a profitable business. And on the design side, you're looking at, oh, what kind of systems work? What kind of value can I provide that can meet the needs of the players and their motivations? And doing that enabled you to increase the engagement and potentially monetize, creating additional revenue streams. So it is kind of a balance of the both, the way that I look at product management in gaming. As always, these things vary a little bit as you go from one company to the other or one product to a different product. Now, but the key takeaway at the end of it is that product management is now a critical role in the gaming industry. And with the rate that it is growing, with the advent of subscriptions, cloud gaming, things like that, there can only be more demand for this discipline from my perspective in this industry. So what makes it unique? This is a little bit of a dense slide in terms of the amount of context that I want to provide. So let's start with player interaction and choices. If you take a product like Netflix, where you have content that's being video content that's being streamed out to you, you come in, you look at what interests you, and you consume it. It's a one-way feeding of the one-way communication. If you look at an e-retail app like Amazon, you're in there to make a purchase, right? You're looking for a product, you find the product, you add it to your cart, you check it out, and you're done. The next time you're in there, it is in connection with to buy a new product, or you wanted to return a product, or one of those flows. So there is this clean steps that are expected in terms of behavioral outcomes, where well, once a user likes a product, you want them to add it to cart, and there's a step B, a step C, a step D, and it's pretty well defined. When it comes to gaming, it differs on both these points. On the first one, it is a two-way communication highway, because when you launch a content or a game for a player, the player has control. After the initial stage in the game, it is up to the player to engage in the content in a way that they feel inclined to. So once the hand holding in the early part of the game is done, I can decide how many levels I play in a day. I can decide if I want to use a product or not. I can decide if I want to invite my friends. So there is so many different ways that the content can be consumed. In fact, a new feature may not be even be consumed by a consumer, by a player, because they don't like that feature for whatever reason. So there isn't a clear, there is a lot of agency that lies with the player that it differs from other products. On the second piece, it is almost impossible. There are several cases in which you cannot say that, oh, if a player has played this level, then they will spend on a power-up and then they will spend money. It is not a well-defined step in the sense of predictability. In fact, only 1% to 2% of a game's player base actually spends dollars on the systems in the game. So it's hard to predict that because there is agency in the player. And so somebody could, for example, decide to engage in a leaderboard feature and not engage in progressing through the game. So I'll come to that in a second. So that was the first point. The second point is about motivations. Most of the apps, a lot of the apps that we use are productivity apps, and you go in there to accomplish a task and you get the satisfaction because you've managed to be productive and you've gotten some utilitarian value out of that action. In case of gaming, you're not in there to be productive, at least not in the traditional sense. You're in there because you want to have fun, you want to be entertained, you want to feel relaxed, you want to fill time. And there's a lot of different motivations that go into it. And so at the end of the day, you are looking at gaining some level of pleasure from engaging with that particular game. And that's why it's more of a hedonic motivation when it comes to games. So diving a little deeper, this bottom left chart is a framework, one among many that is available, and you can find this online. So as a player, I could come in and I might decide to play a game because one, it is a fantasy and I escape from my current life, or I want to be immersed in the story. It could be a game that allows me to create things. For example, I want to create a new character, or I want to create a new house and decorate it. Or I just like shooting monsters and I play a game that allows me to shoot tons of monsters nonstop and keep going. Could also be that I like playing with others, and therefore I want a game that has a lot of social community competition available in it. And some people, they just want to be the best of the game no matter what, and they would like to beat other people in order to accomplish that achievement. And some people just want to make the progress. I want to be able to say I completed 2000 levels in Candy Crush, and that's my achievement. And so when it comes to game design and feature design and live services, you are trying to target some or combination of these motivations that players have and figure out what features will fit those and how it will help sustain engagement. So that's another piece. And third point in the player section is the player investment. As I mentioned before, the fact that I've accomplished 2000 levels in Candy Crush is of meaning to me. That has meaning to me, and I have spent my time, money, and effort doing that. I have managed to collect a lot of cosmetic items in my game, and that has meaning to me. So there is a constant level of investment that a player makes that we have to keep in mind when we decide to change a feature or decide to launch a new feature that may impact what the player has already invested in. So that makes it different because it's never like, oh, you received a product from Amazon, you use the product and it's done. It's not a consumable because it's more like a durable where there's continuous investment that keeps happening. The last 2 points are about the role in itself rather than the product. So first thing I would call out, which is starting to be the case with a lot of digital products, but the scale of data and analytics. So because it is a game and the player is in the ecosystem of the game and the world of the game, you have the ability to track everything that the player does. They may be clicking on a button, they may choose to spend on a power-up, they may choose to connect with another friend. You're able to track all of this. And so the scale of data that is available to you is immense. And so it is on your skill set as a product manager to come up with the right problem statement, come up with the right hypothesis that makes sense within the context of the game, which will allow you to handle this overwhelming amount of data. So that's another piece that I would call out. That's one of the things that I also face coming in from consumer goods industry into game product management. The last piece is share of product ownership. And what I mean by this is that in most cases, when you're a product manager in a non-gaming industry, when you own a product, you either have full ownership of a part of the product or you have full ownership of the entire product, depending on the size of the product and what seniority you are. When it comes to gaming, the ownership is in a shared sense with, for example, a creative director or a producer. And the reason being that the product at its fundamental level needs to be fun, which means that there is a ton of creative effort and creative thinking, design that goes into it. And there are disciplines that are specialized in it. And these may not necessarily be product managers' forte. So in the game development phase, for example, the role of the product manager may be smaller, and the role of the creative director and the producer may be very large. And then in the post-launch phase, the product manager's role may tend to be much bigger in terms of controlling the revenue streams and controlling the feature roadmaps for that game. So I wanted to put that slight nuance and give an insight into it. All right. So, having spoken about what makes it different, what are the skills that you are likely to need in order to become a good game product manager? Now, a lot to unpack here. I've put down a list of things in the essential sections. Now, these are common skills that span to product management everywhere. So I won't spend much time going over it, but essentially, data analysis, being able to identify and frame problem statements, working with assumptions, and managing trade offs, practical understanding of engineering and planning, because it is important for you to be able to work with different disciplines and how they estimate their work, how they think about solutions, because that will help you get a much better outcome from the cross-functional teams. And finally, the ability to influence without authority. I think it applies to all product managers. You may not always have a dedicated team that is assigned to you, which means that you need to build a relationship. You need to be able to think from a tech standpoint, from a design standpoint, from a production standpoint, and then be able to take their considerations into picture and then work on what the ideal outcome would be. Now that's essential side. So much more time to be spent on incremental. First point being, in this role, it is essential that you have exposure to. You don't have to be an expert, but you have exposure to design. And what I mean by that is in three parts: design thinking, systems design, and UX design. Design thinking, because gaming inherently is deeply tied to player motivation. So you need to be empathetic enough to understand what they need. You need to figure out what can fill those needs, how to generate that value, iterate, test it, and then be able to go back and solve these problems creatively. Systems design. As I mentioned before, in a game, there are a lot of different things that are available. There is content, there are things that you can buy, there are cosmetics, depending on the game, there are so many different vectors. It is important for you to understand that there is it is a collection of systems and they all interact with each other. So making a change in one means that it has an impact on several other things, other systems in the game, especially when there is an economy at play, because we use currency within games and the currency can be gained at one place and spent at another place. So there is an equation that you have to keep in mind, and your ability to connect these things together and hold that in your mind will provide you with a big advantage when it comes to game product management. UX design. The piece to understand here is, again, not to be an expert in it, but to understand the fact that the way that information is provided, the way that it's communicated to the player has an impact on how they behave. And that piece is important. And you will find that a lot of times performance of a game has a lot of reliance on how the UX is. And so having a broad understanding of that field would definitely help with this role. Again, data-driven decision making, because of the sheer amount of data that is available. Almost all decisions, you are going to be looking for data validation. Deep understanding of player motivation and behavior. There are several frameworks available. You can search for some behavioral psychology as well. For example, self-determination theory or Myers-Briggs profile. The fundamentals exist in other fields such as psychology, which then translates into how it applies for a gamer. And then tying all this together, you should be able to influence outcomes on design, experience, and player behavior. And the last 2 points essentially is more about how you operate, which is coming with a creative product development mindset. What that means is that I think I like to frame it as, well, there is more than one solution to a problem, especially in games, that holds true. And that's mostly because of all the systems at play. You could solve a problem by changing the paradigm or the context of the entire problem itself. And so keeping that open mindset, being able to iterate, being able to apply creative thinking or design thinking to solving a problem is important in this field. And then finally, not a requirement, but definitely helps, familiarity with games and mechanics. You're going to be working with a collection of people who are passionate about games, who are playing games day in, day out. And so your openness to playing games on a regular basis and understanding mechanics will definitely help you build a relationship within the industry, and also have conversations that can lead to innovation. So those are the ones that I would specifically call out. This piece is about my 2 cents or 5 cents on landing a game PM role. They're all interconnected. So if you're interviewing for a game PM role, first thing that I would say is spend the time and do the research for the company and the industry that you're trying to get into. So read up on gaming, what's new in there, what does this company specifically do, what are their successes, find that out. If you know which game you're going to be a product manager for, play it. And I don't mean play it for an hour, but play it long enough to understand the systems within it. In fact, I would say attempt a teardown. A teardown is nothing but breaking down the game, studying a game and breaking it down to its parts so you can understand how it operates. For example, on the right are screenshots from a teardown that was done on Clash of Clans. You'll find tons of this online. You'll find data against it, so look up the data as well. Because when you go through the process of doing this, you will realize how the game systems interact with each other. And that will lead you, especially being new to the industry, to ask questions that will prove your ability to grok this information and distill it. And you don't have to worry about somebody thinking, oh, well, that's a dumb question. Nobody is going to, especially if you're coming in from a different industry. People are going to appreciate you for the fact that you've put in that effort and you were able to ask a question that made sense. In fact, it might be a question that is addressing a problem that the game team is trying to solve in the first place. And that'll be a great synergy for you to have. And the final piece that I would say is if you have examples in your career where you've applied creative thinking to solving problems, especially where you have changed the context of the problem in itself and solved it by flipping it. I know these are words that I say out loud, but if you have examples where you've applied unconventional solutions, definitely bring that out, because I think it allows you to show a mindset that is different from traditional. So those are my a few thoughts on landing a game PM role. So let's jump into 2 examples of problem statements that you may run into as a game product manager, a mid to junior level game product manager. I want to do this because I want to provide a flavor of some of the day-to-day problems that you might see. So first up, it is a case for retention. So when you come in as a product manager, you're looking at the metrics on a day-to-day basis, and you notice that there is a sharp drop in D2 retention. Day2 retention, some of you may be aware of what it means, is that if your players installed your app on day 1, did they come back on? What percentage of those players came back on day 2? Now, this is an important metric because it tells you if you have a high D2 retention, that means that the players are liking it, they continue to engage in it, and potentially they will continue to remain in the game. So in this case, you saw a sharp drop in D2 retention. A game product manager would then, the way they would approach this problem is, okay, what are the pieces in the game that the player interfaces with in the first time they open up the app and on the first day that they engage with the app? And one of the first things that come up, which is why in the potential hypothesis, is the first-time user experience. First-time user experience is nothing but the way that the game teaches you when you open it the first time as to how to play the game. So I've captured screenshots from how Coin Master, which is a popular game, what their first-time user experience looks like. So from top to from here to the right, and then here to the right. So it could be, for example, in this case, that one of these pop-ups is not working. Or, for example, when you're supposed to spin this reel, you click on spin and it doesn't grant you currency. And that currency, you need that currency to be able to progress, so the player actually gets stuck. And so they're like, oh, what the hell is this game? I'm done with this, and I leave the game and I never come back. So that could be a reason that happens. So you will probably run a funnel analysis where you will see, okay, we started with 100% of players here, and then in this screen, we lost about 10% of the players. We have 90% left. In this screen, 90%. On this screen, 80%, and so on. So you'll have a trend of what that funnel looks like. And you're going to, when this happens, you're trying to find out if any of those stages dropped faster, or you saw a sheer drop. For example, on this page, on this screen, you might see that you lost almost 50% of your remaining players in the screen. So that allows you to go back to tech and design and to your QA team to figure out, okay, well, is there an issue there? Now, it could be a whole different thing that a new feature was launched, and that feature was never meant for new players, but somehow because of configuration error, that it was available, and that threw off the initial experience for the players, and that resulted in them churning away. So these are a few hypotheses that I wanted to call out, and there are several more depending on the game. Aside from this, you always check for tech issues, and you will always check to make sure that the data wasn't wrong. So those are hygiene checks that you need to do. But it kind of gives you a flavor of a simple problem that, not simple, but problem that appears simple but has a lot of impact on how the game performs. Example two, a little more complex case. This is more revenue oriented. Um, let's say you've been noticing a steady decline in a rolling 30-day spend account in your game. So it's a moving average of 30 days. You're seeing that decline over the last 3 weeks. And so what could possibly cause cause this issue, right? Unlike the previous thing, there is, because it's a moving 30-day average, it's unlikely that it is going to be one single event that caused one drop. It is likely to be a much larger problem that is slowly chipping away at your spending potential. So here are a few hypotheses that I came up with, and I've used Contest of Champions as an example. I'm not saying this game has that problem, it is just to illustrate. So it could be that the content quality and strength that for a content piece that you launched 8 weeks ago has not been great, and it's met with bad reception from the player, or it is not receiving the engagement that you would normally see with other content, and so people's spending on it went down. It could be that the pop-ups that sell you in-game currency and items, there is a problem with the logic in those pop-ups, and they're not appearing as they would normally, and therefore your reason to convert has gone down. And so that could be resulting in an issue. It could be that you launched a feature that is taking engagement away from another feature, and that other feature actually performs really well in terms of monetization. So you've now drawn engagement from that feature, and so there's a drop in conversions there. It could be that one feature that you launched is a very easy feature to complete as a player, and you're receiving rewards from it, which is essentially currency that you would have otherwise spent on. So that's causing an inflation in the economy that results in your spend propensity going down. And then it could be that players discovered a new way of tying things together. And that's what is called as emergent player tactics, play behavior. So you launched a feature, players found out that in that feature you're able to get a specific item. They were able to take that item, go into a different feature, put that item in there, and achieve success in the task over there, which gave them more currency or which gave them other items. And so you didn't really have to spend on getting new items. So it might be, and that's something that as a designer or a PM you hadn't anticipated, and now you've recognized as a problem. And these are just few hypotheses amongst several others that you could come up with. So as you can see, when you have the size of the data that you have and the kind of hypothesis that you could generate, you're going to have to take each of these and validate and prove it. You're going to have to apply the context of the game and the game systems, where the player is on their player journey, and then tie those things together to come up with the right hypothesis for a problem like this. So that was quick 2 examples. I have one bonus section. I will keep this simple and short. This essentially gives you a quick peek at different aspects of game PM work on a day-to-day basis, just for those folks who want to kind of understand what that looks like. Again, this is not exhaustive by any means, and this can vary between game team to game team, game company to game company. First up, what you do from a daily review standpoint, right? I've included this infographic that defines some of these terms. I thought this was pretty reasonable. These terminologies vary from companies to company a little bit. So it's a definition that matters. So you can refer to it, and the link is provided at the bottom. But in a daily review, you come in and you look at all of your key metrics, whether it is installs, DAU, daily revenue, your ARPDAU, or your conversion rates, acquisition metrics. You're out there paying for users, showing ads and acquiring users, what those metrics look like. You're looking at retention, like we spoke about, and you're looking at what lifetime value or cumulative ARPU is for a user. And then you're looking at player voice in the community, looking at issues or reviews of sentiment that informs you or calls out a problem to you that you can go fix preemptively. So that's something that you do on a daily basis. It allows a game product manager to build a baseline or a reference for each metric and a tolerance level for it. So you're able to when something fluctuates, you can make a decision on, oh, well, is that expected? Is that usual? If you need to and if you need to go investigate it further. So earlier example on retention is something like that. You start seeing a variation that is not usual, and then you start investigating it. A peek into analytics. You are going to work closely with data analysts, business analysts, and data scientists. You're going to have to define problem statements and create hypotheses that they will try to validate, or you will work with them to validate. When new features are being designed, you will have to model out what impact those features are likely to have. For example, we are creating let's say a leaderboard within a game. You're going to find out how many players are likely to engage with it, how many players will replay in order to stay on the top of the leaderboard, and therefore how much impact does that have on the time that a player spends in the game, how much impact does that have on the number of spenders in the game, and you will set KPI targets that you will have to meet in order for the feature to be called successful. And then, as usual, you will track ongoing investigations with your analyst about the things that are already in play, or doing the homework for a new feature that needs to be done. Peek into design and features. You are going to be writing feature specs. You're going to be working with other stakeholders, improving it, iterating on it. You're going to review design specs that a designer made and to make sure that it lines up with business goals. You will attend UX walkthroughs and spend time validating player behavior. So that's a regular part of product management, I think, here as well as in other places. More staple product management stuff that you'll have to do. You are going to do a 3 to 6 month rolling live services plan that talks about what content, what events, what kind of levels, what kind of marketing that goes out during that period. You will have to build or inform a 12-month product roadmap. It could be longer, but you're figuring out if the features on those actually meet the business goals. You'll have to assess, based on the feature modeling that you did, the return on investment on those features, and then establish trade-offs like you would do with regular. And another key piece, as a product manager in gaming, revenue is always on you. And so you will be forecasting revenue commitments based on the roadmap that you've come up with and the live services plan that you've come up with. And the last piece, again, I don't cover all of it. These are just some key areas: market and competition. There are close to 1 million gaming apps out there, I think, and several are coming out on a daily basis. And any of those could become breakout hits. And so you are keeping an eye on the ones that are starting to perform well. You're keeping an eye on what they've done differently, what kind of game it is, what mechanics have they used, have they evolved any mechanics, are they trying to match new kinds of motivations? Those things, and having a deep understanding of that will allow you to inform your product decisions and your product roadmap better, thereby extending the life cycle of both the player and the product and the game that you have. So that really wraps up all the pieces of our introduction to game product management from my perspective. Again, we tried to cover a lot of information. Apologize if I was a little bit fast on the pacing. Feel free to reach out to me with questions on LinkedIn. Drop me a message so that I know that you're coming from this session. And that's about it. Just a quick shout out to all the places that I sourced images and charts from. So thank you, everyone, and have a good day.